The Biden administration has just granted protections to hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans who have already crossed into the United States. And right now in Texas, at places like Eagle Pass, thousands of migrants are lining up and waiting under the international bridge and crossing en masse over to the United States.
Looks like the Biden administration is finally giving in to the pressure from Democratic politicians in parts of the country like New York City, for instance. Now, Democrats have been urging the Biden administration to do something about the migrant crisis, as in some cases, hundreds of thousands of migrants have poured into their cities, essentially creating a housing crisis because these are individuals who need shelter. These towns don't have the resources necessary to deal with it. And so yesterday, Biden announced that he would follow through on some of their requests, granting more than 470,000 Venezuelan immigrants temporary protected status while the conditions in their home country essentially prevent a safe return. So the decision comes as cities have been struggling to house the increase in asylum seekers coming north as border towns are running out of resources. So let's take a look at the next video so you kind of get a sense of how dire the situation has been in some parts of the country.
You are at a crisis level here.
I would say yes.
John Martin is deputy director of the shelter in El Paso. He says the inflow of migrants has been increasing for weeks.
All of the downtown shelters are all working over capacity. We simply don't want to say no.
At another migrant support center, even the floor is welcome refuge for Marjorie Hernandez and Carlos Mota and their two small children. It took them 2 months to make the more than 3,000-mile trek from Venezuela to Texas.
I anticipate, unfortunately, that we'll continue to see these increases on a daily basis.
Near Eagle Pass, Texas this week, more than 5,000 people streamed through in a day. The influx prompted the mayor to sign an emergency declaration, while in Arizona, hundreds were detained, some in makeshift cages.
Don't try to send people to
In New York, migrant arrivals have divided the city. Officials say $2 billion has been spent since last year to house more than 100,000 migrants bused to the city.
So the whole point of the temporary legal status is to allow for these migrants to work, so they don't have to rely as heavily on government aid or the shelters that are now just overfilling with people. In New York specifically, there just isn't enough space in these shelters. So in some parts of Manhattan, for instance, or even Staten Island, you'll see migrants kind of sleeping on sidewalks and things like that. And Waz, as a New Yorker yourself, have you familiarized yourself with this? Do you have any family members or loved ones who have been experiencing this in New York?
No, because this is like a fairly new phenomenon, right? And honestly, like where most of these migrants would be at is not actually in the sort of rank and file neighborhoods in New York City where people I know might necessarily live. But I could imagine, it's going to be a strain on how the city operates no matter what, because they're just not prepared for this. And yeah, I'm glad the administration has done something, because let's face it, man, the Democratic Party's policy on immigration for about 15 years now has been, let's just sit on our hands and do nothing. That's basically it. It's like, oh, we don't want to come out and say we don't want these people to be here, but at the same time, we don't want to actually give a full-throated endorsement about an actual policy and a way forward. That just hasn't been the case. So at least this is something, right? Granting these people temporary legal status, I'd like to see their actual cases to be here actually go through the system, and people that that immigration feels like it makes sense for them to stay can stay, and that would be awesome. But also, I would just hope that everybody in those places where these migrants are understand that these people making a freaking 3,000-mile trek, which it's even more if you're getting to New York City. They're not doing this for no reason. The conditions in their country are pretty god awful, and you will not be surprised to learn, Anna, that US foreign policy in those countries are directly, not indirectly, directly responsible for the conditions on the ground. So our government in our name has wrought some of these conditions, and this is the fallout. It's only natural that these people are seeking refuge somewhere where they could live decent, dignified lives.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And so not only do I think we have some responsibility in helping these people out, but I also think that the federal government has in fact failed the entire country when it comes to this issue and the migrants themselves. So you'll see so many members of Congress complain about this issue on social media as if they're not members of Congress who could actually, work on legislation to reform our immigration policies. And we desperately need that. We desperately need more resources at the border, more asylum judges, immigration judges, in order to actually hear these asylum cases and make a decision. Right now, the backlog is 3 to 4 years long, and that's exacerbating the issue. And for everyone who thinks that Trump handled the immigration crisis well, all he really did was ban asylum seekers from coming into the country during the coronavirus pandemic. But what do you think that did? That just led to a backlog of people who are gonna try to come into the country. And so as soon as those restrictions were lifted, you have migrants pouring in to the United States seeking asylum. And that's what Biden has to deal with now. And he can't deal with immigration unilaterally. You need immigration reform to pass through Congress. So I'm not really interested in their social media posts, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. How about you do your jobs? Okay, your posturing and your theater on this issue isn't solving anything. But I want to give you some more details because Eagle Pass Mayor Rolando Salinas, who's a Democrat, declared a state of emergency. A three-year-old boy had drowned on Wednesday after he was swept downriver while crossing with his family, and that's according to the Texas Department of Public Safety. And as we know, razor wire and floating buoys were placed in the Rio Grande by Greg Abbott, and that has also contributed to deaths of multiple migrants, including children. But going back to the new Biden plan, who does this apply to and what does it actually mean? On Wednesday, Department of Homeland Security announced that Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is extending and redesignating Venezuela for temporary protected status for 18 months for individuals that were residing in the United States on or before July 31st. DHS anticipates around 472,000 Venezuelans will be newly eligible for the status, according to Homeland Security officials, or to a Homeland Security official. And that announcement is the largest expansion of temporary protected status to date. The department also said that as a result, an additional approximately hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan nationals across the country will be immediately eligible to apply for work authorization. TPS provides temporary protection from removal, as well as employment authorization for eligible Venezuelan nationals. And look, that's really important, not only so these individuals can work and provide for themselves, which would hopefully, kind of lessen the stress on the programs and the shelters that are helping these migrants out, but also to ensure that they're not relying on the underground economy where there's a lot of exploitation, where there's a lot of abuse, and really no ability to protect themselves from that exploitation and abuse. So I do think that this is the right move. And look, if people are coming in and claiming asylum, our current laws mean that their asylum cases must be heard. Those are the laws. And if members of Congress or voters have problems with those laws, understand they need to be reformed through Congress. That's how it works. I don't know what else to say. This idea of no, the president just makes the decision unilaterally and we have an open border policy. There is no open border policy, but we do have an asylum program. And as a result of those laws, people get to have their asylum claims heard by a judge and decided by a judge. Anything to add to that, Waz?
Yeah, I think what you just described is something called a functioning government, which we haven't seen here in these parts for a really long time. And lastly, what I want people to understand, wherever you stand on the immigration, the migrant issue, I think me personally, I'm not opposed to this idea that we should enforce a border, right? I think every country, if they want to, deserves to have a border and enforcement of that border. However, I think in cases like Venezuela, these people's cases, they have the right to have them heard because the United States of America is directly responsible for the conditions within their country. I'm not saying America made everything how it is, but America plays a large role in the outcomes that happen in places like South and Central America. And secondly, I would want people to understand that their freaking neighbors have already picked up a lot of the slack. If you go to places like Panama and Colombia, there's already a huge population of Venezuelan immigrants in those places. So if Colombia can do its part to pick up the slack and take in their Venezuelan neighbors, Colombia, guys, the United States of America can do its part too.
Absolutely. And look, there are also pretty significant benefits to immigration as well. For instance, one thing that became very apparent during the coronavirus pandemic, as people were being blocked from seeking asylum in the United States or immigrating to the United States. Just couple that with the fact that less people are having kids. And so our population has been aging as a result of that. So look, there are giant economic benefits to having an immigration system that actually works. I think we do need reforms, but the idea that we need to like shut our borders and make it increasingly difficult for people to immigrate in the United States, I think is ill-conceived and leads to all sorts of terrible consequences. Anyway, but I wanted to just add that aside from that, the Biden administration is apparently doing more. For instance, Biden officials said the Pentagon would mobilize 800 active duty personnel to the southern border to ease the strain on US agents, adding to the 2,500 National Guard troops deployed there. And I wanna be clear, I know it sounds scary to send, it sounds scary when you hear that they're sending National Guard troops. But these are not individuals who are gonna use like weapons or police the migrants. It's more about helping to process the asylum claims and essentially ease some of the burden that the agents are dealing with as there's like a giant influx of migrants seeking asylum at the border. So, it's a good start for the Biden administration. And I know that the executive branch is limited in what it can do unilaterally. Honestly, most of my frustration at this point, most of my rage is directed toward Congress and their inability to really do anything to alleviate and reform this issue.
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us, become a Young Turk.